Today we're going to be doing a review for your third exam, and that exam will cover chapters 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. This video will be posted to Blackboard. You'll have access to it on Blackboard. A couple of thoughts. After the first couple of tests, I noticed patterns emerging, and I think there are strategies you can adopt for better success. This third test, if you look at how my tests are ordinarily structured, the first test is the most sort of philosophical and general. The second and third test are formatted very similarly. Then the fourth test is basically a different format from the earlier three. So depending upon your success or lack of success on the second test, the third test is structured essentially the same. The change in structure is there's going to be a larger number of questions that will be derived from the in-class lectures, and particularly material that has been made available to you in the form of PowerPoint slides. A couple of thoughts. You do need to read the book. At this time of the year, people are wearing out, wearing down. There's a lot of end-of-semester projects. I understand that. You do have to make a commitment to digging through the book because a lot of the smaller, more detailed questions are derived from the book, and they are found in the true-false multiple choice questions. Many of you really suffer on those true-false questions, which in my mind comes from a non-careful reading of the question or perhaps not enough grasp of the material. I will go through these chapters. I have the book here in front of me, and to give you some high points for study, this will assist you particularly in the short answer completion questions portion of the test. Hopefully you will take other direction as to study emphases. One caution I want to give you, this material, law in general, is full of lists. And if I tell you it's not on the test in a list, it's not on the test in a list. It's my intention to try to protect you from undue memorization. And so if there is a list, I will tell you there's a list. And if there is a list, I tell you it's on the test, it's on the test. Trust me. Going to Chapter 17. Chapter 17 really has three subject areas in it. It has the statute of frauds, it has the parole evidence rule, and then some generalized rules on how the courts interpret contracts. The statute of frauds you've had available to you in a PowerPoint. I will ask you what the statute of frauds is. That requires a definition. The definition has two elements. The requirement of evidence of a writing is one element, and the requirement of a signature by the obligated party is a second part. The classes of contracts subject to the classes of contracts subject to the statute of frauds, there's 6 of them. I expect you to know that. Sorry, it's pure memorization. I understand that, but that question is right there in front of God and everybody. It's on your test. Now, I don't expect full, long descriptions like I would have had in class. For example, if you're listing the classes of contracts, you can simply put real property. You don't need to have a contract evidencing an interest in real property. Just put real property so that I know that you know. There's a very helpful graphic on page 341 on Chapter 17 talking about exceptions to the parole evidence rule, exceptions to the statute of frauds, and also kind of an explanation of the parole evidence rule. I think that's a very good, well-designed study aid. Now, as to the parole evidence rule, basically you need to know that if a contract is complete and unambiguous, the parties have entered into, then you can't bring other evidence into court that would contradict what you've signed. The exceptions, the attributes of the parole evidence rule and the exceptions to that rule, again, are found in that chart on page 341. You will not have that definition on the test. You don't recite it back to me on the test. You will have some questions, for example, what kind of memorandum is required. Remember, the contract itself doesn't need to be in writing. There just has to be written evidence of the contract. Moving on to the rules of interpretation and construction. Once again, that ugly concept, incorporation by reference, rears its head. It's on test 2. It's going to be on test 3, found on page 351 in chapter 17. You need to know the material generally on whole contract and contradictory and ambiguous terms. In the ambiguous terms section, there's really 2 subparagraphs that will be tested on. Those on page 354, the nature of the writing, which is the precedence of handwritten over typewritten or word process generated over pre-printed, and then the other question of strict construction against the drafting party. How I described that in class, I called that the insurance company rule. You need to know the source of missing terms, which was conduct of the party, and custom and usage of trade. All right, moving into chapter 18, third persons in contracts. Now, I want you to know the 3 types of three types of third-party beneficiary. That's debtor, donee, and incidental. Remember, as I told you in class, if you see a true-false question that says an incidental beneficiary is a third-party beneficiary, your answer to that is false, because how the authors intended that question to be understood is, does the third-party beneficiary or incidental beneficiary have enforceable rights under the contract, which they don't. Remember, that's the is the pothole example, where you as a homeowner can't sue the city if they do a bad job on your potholes. That's the incidental beneficiary. All right, moving over, the bigger part of this chapter, really the heart of this chapter, is assignment. I want you to know the core doctrine. It's in a PowerPoint. That the assignee takes a contract subject to claims, defenses, and set-offs good against the assignor. You will need to know that. Now, when you get into the weeds on assignment, questions you will see on the test deal with, for example, kinds of contracts that can't be assigned. Remember, if the contract itself prohibits assignment, then it can't be assigned. And also you have some other kinds of contracts that can't be assigned that are found in the chart on page 369 of the exam. Now, I want you to know those. I want you to know those as a list. I expect you to know the warranties of the assignor. Those are found in paragraph 13 on page 371. I won't expect you to list them, but you will have questions that will ask you about assignors' warranties. Okie doke. Keep in mind the general example. Of course, I gave you the silly example, about somebody assigning their rights under a pro basketball contract to me. Well, remember, they can assign their rights, which is simply the right to be paid a ton of money, or they can delegate their duties as well, which obviously I can spend somebody's money, but I can't play basketball. So keep those concepts separate. We have the PowerPoint. I walked through the example about continuing S nor liability when we did the potato warehouse example. That's worthwhile to review that. Okay, moving over to Chapter 19 on discharge, I want you to know the three types of conditions: condition precedent, concurrent, and condition subsequent. You don't have to explain them, I just need you to know what they are. Know the difference between the rules on tender of payment and tender of performance. Now, under tender of performance, you need to know when time is a material term. Time is a material term. It's described as being time is of the essence. You will have several questions, not one, but several questions on the substantial performance doctrine. There's a PowerPoint on it, and it's found on page 383 of your text. Read those questions carefully. I've had a question on the substantial performance doctrine in the past, and historically, a significant number of students have the answer exactly wrong. Now, there's a real beauty to that, but it's still wrong. That tells me you knew a little bit about it, but not enough to read the question carefully. The chart is worthwhile on page 384. Now, there's a interesting, well, I don't know, interesting is the right word, a lengthy paragraph on page 387 listing the ways you describe a contract by agreement. That will not be on your exam as a list. However, the subjects there are what I call terms of art. For example, accord and satisfaction. So will you have a question, for example, that says an accord and satisfaction will act as a discharge on a contract? Yes. So to answer that question, you need to know what an accord and satisfaction is. So I would say to you, you should go through that and reduce all of those subjects there to a sentence fragment. When we talk about discharge by external clauses, there's a significant PowerPoint on that when I said, remember, the impossibility has to be objective, not subjective. I gave you the example of the business burning down. And then we had economic frustration, or what I called it in class, frustration of purpose, where the guys were renting the room, kind of a leased room, I don't know if a hotel or not, to watch the coronation parade for Edward VII, and he got sick with appendicitis. You need to know that rule. And the other one that you will see on the test is the doctrine of commercial impracticability. Example I used in class was the ships being sunk in the Suez Canal, forcing oil tankers to have to sail around the Horn of Africa to get to Europe. So those are important subjects on impossibility. When you get over to discharge by operation of law, there's a list there. You won't see that on the test as a list. However, if you see a question, bankruptcy discharges most civil obligations or most business obligations, the answer to that's true. So you need to know generally what a bankruptcy is, what a statute of limitation is, contractual limitations. Okay, moving over to Chapter 20, breach of contract and remedies. Here's kind of a list chapter. It's a list chapter and a definitional chapter. I'd like to make it more exciting than that, but it is what it is. You need to know what an anticipatory repudiation is, how it leads to an anticipatory breach. There's two types, by words and by conduct. You will need to know what cure is, and that's curative tender. Remember, I gave you the example of the guys bringing the wrong color beer to Jack and Dan's before St. Patty's Day, and that the UCC will give them a few extra days, if they can, to let them go back to the brewery and come up with green beer. The other Uniform Commercial Code concept that be found in your exam is cover. Remember when the dairy farmer had to go get hay from someone else because his vendor didn't supply? We call that vendor or cover. When the someone has to go out on the open market and buy substitute goods. You need to know those terms. Okay, now the heart of this chapter is basically damages. Now, I give you a list of 5 types of damages. You need to know those. You will see them on the exam. Now, your book uses the phrase direct damages. That's not a term I've ever used or was used when I was in law school. I think you'll find it in some of the literature, but as I said in class, the word direct damages is not the correct answer to any question on my exam. Don't do it. So you need to know the different kinds of damages. You need to know that with consequential damages, that's our flour mill case, you have a duty to mitigate. Go buy substitute gear for your flour mill from the guy down the street. I want you to know also the equitable remedies. So the book, in a confusing way, sort of intermingles them. I separated them out for class. We have damages here, we have equitable remedies over here. They have different purposes. Okay, last on this chapter is some material on page 412 on exculpatory clauses. Gave you the example. I think the PowerPoint slide has Dell and Microsoft, where we allow businesses to limit their damages and define how damages will be calculated, and also the material on attorney's fees with the English as well as the American rule on attorney's fees. The last chapter on the test will be the chapter 21 that has a variety of not all that closely related concepts. They're just terms dealing with property and property interests not covered by the Uniform Commercial Code. I want you to know the classes of personal property. You will not see that on a test as a list. You will see questions on gifts. Now there's 2 kinds of gifts, an inter vivos gift and a gift in causa mortis, and I want you to understand how those gifts are formed, and also I want you to know the elements of a gift. The elements of a gift are donative intent and delivery. With the lost property, I want you to know the general rules. I give you a list in class that includes the 3 classes of property that are in your book, plus treasure trove, when you go out and find buried treasure. You will not see that on your exam as a list. I want you to know the rule on wild animals, how you own them, and the rules on abandoned property. Now, there probably will be one question maybe on escheat, just a definitional question. What is escheat? Now, when we get into the multiple owners of property, basically, I cover in class the marital estates, tenancy by the entirety, and community property, but the real heart of the subject matter for business is tenants in common and joint tenants with right of survivorship. You need to know what the right of survivorship is. Remember the example of Donald Duck and his 3 nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. All right? That's the rule on survivorship and how it works. You will have questions on that. With bailment, this is a definitional section. We have bailors, bailees, bailments, bailed goods. Learn those terms. I want you to know who has the burden of proof. If you're claiming that your guitar was scratched while your nephew had borrowed it, who has the duty of coming forward with evidence in court to establish that injury to the bailed goods? Also, we're going to break down bailments into 3 types of bailments. Bailments for the benefit of the bailor, bailments for the benefit of both the bailor and the bailee, which is your commercial bailment, and a bailment for the benefit of the bailee. There's different rules that apply as to the amount of negligence necessary to put blame on the BLaw. I want you to know those. You will not see them on the exam as a list. The test is 100 questions. It's content rich. We have basically just a couple of weeks left for class, but we have a full 50% of the points available for the semester still on the table. So I recommend to you, you apply yourself. Good luck.